I haven't done a news article in a while, but I came across this one and it not only totally misses the mark in spectacular fashion, but it blows the crazy things the SJWs say out of the water while proving that they don't have a clue what they're saying at the same time. This is all manner of fail for the far left, which really isn't a surprise, is it? So let's take a look at an article called "Women Are the Stronger Sex," and here's the scientific proof. Researchers at the University of Southern Denmark trawled through historic data looking at death rates for men and women who suffered famines and epidemics or who were sold into slavery. In virtually every case, they found that women survived their ordeals far longer, often outliving their male counterparts by years, even when conditions were equally dire. Well, so much for the regressive idea that gender is cultural, huh? Because all the way through this article, we see that they're trying to make women more physically durable than men based on their biology. I thought the biology didn't matter, and all you had to do to be a woman was just decide that you were. For example, before the Irish potato famine, which devastated the country from 1845 to 1849, both men and women lived until they were 38 on average. But at the height of the crisis, although life expectancy dropped to 18.17 for men, it only fell to 22.4 for women. The same pattern was seen during the Swedish famine of 1772 to 1773 and the Ukraine harvest failures of 1933. Women also lived longer during the two 19th century Icelandic measles outbreaks, with females lasting up to 2 years longer than men. Now, these things are obviously statistically true based on the research, and I believe what they're saying. But there's one reason that they're not mentioning why it's probably the case other than women are better than men. And I won't say why at the moment, but let's see if you can figure it out. Lead author Dr. Virginia Zarulli, assistant professor of epidemiology, writing in the journal PNAS, said the conditions experienced by the people in the analyzed populations were horrific. Even though the crises reduced the female survival advantage in life expectancy, women still survived better than men. And indeed they did. Have you figured out the one big part of the puzzle that the leftist researchers are missing, purposely or accidentally? Because I don't think biology had much, if anything, to do with any of this. It's something else. The only exception was in the Trinidadian slave trade, where men outlived women, but the researchers believe that slave traders have a greater incentive to keep male slaves alive because they're worth more. And this is really where we start to get the answer. It had little to do with biology, and everything to do with culture. Women traditionally are treated with more care than men are typically. Men will go without. Men will sacrifice in order to care for the women and children. So when you start looking at famines, it's more likely that men sacrificed their lives and starved to death so that the women would have more to eat. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. After all, we are programmed by evolution to value women over men because women are more necessary to continuing the species and men are much less so. A single man can impregnate dozens of women, but a single woman is useless to a multitude of men, most of whom will never get to pass on their genes. The researchers said the results suggest that women are fundamentally biologically hardier than men, which may be due to differences in sex hormones. Estrogen is a known anti-inflammatory, which also protects the vascular system, while testosterone is a risk factor in many fatal diseases. The male sex hormone may also harm the immune system. All that matters is that people survive long enough to breed. Nothing says that long lives are necessary for the survival of the species. That's how humanity made it through the days when they only lived into their late teens or early 20s. They could still pump out new children, and then they died, and the children survived. Robin Dunbar, professor of evolutionary psychology at Oxford University, said, "I think the answer possibly lies in the fact that males are more fragile. Women are just more determined. Men give up quicker when the going gets tough. Women find it much harder to die when in the final stages and often hang on there well past the point at which males have given up and gone. There's an iconic event in American folklore when a wagon train of pioneers got stranded in the Rockies during the winter on its way to California. The young men died like flies, and the old grannies stuck it out to survive until they were rescued the following spring." So why is this the case? Because traditionally, men have worked harder than women. During the days of slavery, who was it that was out in the fields working the crops? Usually the men. The women stayed home and did less strenuous chores. The men go to war. The men take on the dangerous jobs. The men traditionally protect the women. Cultural and social difference between men and women could also be behind some of the difference. That makes no sense. I'm sorry. But anyway, they never address this, do they? Instead, they blame men for the high preponderance of risk-taking behaviors, while ignoring the fact that men have traditionally kept women from engaging in or being responsible for those risk-taking behaviors. Men have kept women safe. Of course, they refuse to acknowledge that because it gets in the way of their ideology. So, which is it? Are men and women biologically different to the point that you can't just arbitrarily declare yourself to be the other gender and expect to be taken seriously? Or is gender all culturally derived? You can't have it both ways. If it's cultural, then men and women are both the same because it's all a social construct. Women can't be better than men, and men can't be better than women. But if they want to play the women are better card, then they have to admit that biological gender exists, something that a lot of the crazies on the far left don't want to do. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Certainly we've been shaped by evolution that way for a reason. It just works. But I find it funny how these so-called researchers are just ignoring the cultural influence in favor of their ideology. They like the idea that women are better than men, even though a lot of people on the far left want to think that men and women are identical and gender is a social construct. So the far left can't even make up its mind, are gender's inherent and biological differences matter, or don't they? They need to rent a clue. Besides, while I'm not saying that one side is better than the other, after all, both sides are complementary and neither can survive without the other, I am finding it funny how these so-called researchers seem to miss a massive piece of the puzzle. And before anyone thinks Dr. Virginia Cerulli is just a regular researcher, if you look at it, her entire career seems to be focused on proving women are better than men. Seems to be her shtick. That doesn't necessarily make her a bad researcher, but it makes me question her biases. Anyway, what do you think? Is the far left completely clueless when it comes to gender? Because depending on who you listen to, they seem to be saying completely contradictory things. Let me know your views in the comments. I'll just sit here coughing and laughing at the regressives. It's honestly the only thing I can do anymore.